Hello and welcome to Dave the Suit Betting. In this video, I'm going to go over how to find out what the going's like. It's a going allowance and you're going to come up with some numbers. You'll need a basic calculator. The video, I've done it on PowerPoint on my MacBook. It's very, very dry and it's for people who are serious about learning more about horse racing and racetracks. Here's the PowerPoint. Calculating the going allowance. How to calculate the going allowance at any racecourse. Points to know. What is a going allowance? Why do I need to know the going allowance? How can I use a going allowance? How do I calculate what the going allowance is? So, what is a going allowance? A going allowance is a time allowance by which the ground, the going, is either speeding a horse up or slowing a horse down. So obviously soft will slow it down, good to firm will speed it up somewhat. It is calculated in seconds, usually fractions of seconds, unless of course the going's extreme. So hard at Bath, say, or soft, which could be heavy at Haydock. So it's given in fractions of a second per furlong, by which a horse is being slowed down or sped up by the ground conditions. It is either shown as a minus number, such as minus 0.20, or a plus number, such as plus 0.80. So the minus number, minus 0.2, means the ground conditions, the going, is speeding a horse up by a fifth of a second per furlong, which is generally just over a length. But more about that later. The plus number, in this case plus 0.80 seconds, means the horse or horses are being slowed down by ground conditions by 0.8 of a second per furlong, which is over 4 lengths per furlong. So why do you need to know the going allowance? The coursers frequently get the going descriptions wrong. And sometimes you can calculate a going allowance after maybe the first couple of races. I've done it after one. And there are vast differences in each description. So good ground could actually be slightly speeding a horse up or slightly speeding a horse down because of the range of the going description good. How can I use a going allowance? You can use a going allowance when you're profiling a horse. The going allowance is a must for creating your own speed or handicap ratings, which does take a lot of effort and work. So how do you calculate what the going is? You use the racing post times, which are shown in brackets, how much slower or faster the race was run than is the standard time for that distance at that track. So the racing post gives you a time of the race, and then in brackets it will either say fast or slow. So if the race was run faster than standard or slower than standard. So here's a caveat. Different grades of racing have a different allowable standard time to aim for. So what is the standard time? And what are the different standard time allowances for each grade? Okay, standard time is what a Group 1 horse would be expected to run if the ground was neither speeding the horse up or slowing the horse down. In other words, perfect, good ground, which we only get 2 or 3 times a year at certain tracks. So here I have the type of race on the left, So Group 3 listed, open handicap, 0 to 110, etc., etc. This goes down to 0 to 60. Okay, anything worse than 0 to 60, I would use the same seconds per mile behind standard as 0 to 60, but I would use it more as a guide. Okay, now there is also, so these seconds are per mile, which is 8 furlongs. So 0 to 100, which is roughly in the middle of this slide, would be expected to be ran on perfect ground 3.4 seconds slower over a mile than the standard time. There are other types of races, so those that are restricted to 3-year-olds. So that the time of year affects the seconds per mile behind standard that they may run. So you add these on to the actual normal range. So a 0 to 100 would be expected to be running 3.4 seconds per mile slower. But if it was a 3-year-old running in July, you can also add 0.6 seconds to this. So the actual time of the race being allowed will be 4 seconds slower. And then we've also got fillies, who would also be 0.6 seconds slower over a distance of a mile. All these figures are per mile, 8 furlongs. So first of all, you have to make sure that the race is a true race, what is being described, because many handicaps, such as 0 to 70, are contested by a field, and sometimes the best horse is probably 66. And there might be one at 63, in which case it's not really a 0 to 70. I would describe that as a 0 to 65. Also, sometimes there's only one horse with that rating of, say, 69 in a 0 to 70. And if that horse misses the break or dwells in the stall, whatever, and is never in the race, or is held up at the back and never a factor, then you can knock the race down a few notches to maybe a 65. Okay, the seconds per mile need converting to whatever distance the race is being assessed was ran over. So you need to divide the seconds by 8 furlongs. So that's the seconds in the table. So you divide it by 8 and then multiply it by the furlongs of the race you're looking at. So if we've got a 6 furlong 0 to 90 handicap as an example, we would be allowing the race to be ran 4 seconds per furlong slower. 4 seconds per mile slower. But it's not a mile, it's 6 furlong. So we have to divide the 4 by 8, which is how many furlongs there are in a mile, and then we multiply it by this particular distance, which is 6. So it's 4 divided by 8 multiplied by 6, which gives us 3 seconds. So we would expect this race to be ran 3 seconds slower than the standard time if the ground was perfect. So in this example, if the standard time was 1 minute 14.98 seconds, which is 74.98 seconds, and the actual time for the race was 1 minute 15.5 seconds, or 75.550 seconds, which is 75.5 seconds. This was only 0.52 seconds slower than standard. So we take this 0.52 seconds away from the expected 3 seconds slower for the grade, and the race was ran 2.48 seconds faster than would be expected for the grade of the race. So we then divide 2.48 seconds by the distance of 6, and we get a figure of 0.41. So the ground is speeding the horses up. In this particular race, we would expect by 0.41 seconds per furlong. So if you do this for several races, and you will come up with different numbers as an example. So these are the examples. And then you've got to make a judgment. Some examples are more extreme than these I have given. You then have to make a judgment call. So in this example, I would top and tail these, and I'd probably go for a going allowance of minus 0.4 or 0.45. It is a judgment call, and I always round either to 500ths of a second or down to the 4/10ths of a second. I don't have funny numbers like 0.43, 0.46, 0.47. I either go slightly up or slightly down to the nearest 500ths of a second. So here I would be 0.4 or 0.45, and it's a minus number because it's speeding the horse up. So the time of the race will be less. You take this off. So if a race is, they're the easy races. If a race is run over 7 furlong and 160 yards, you have to divide the odd yards by 220, which is the yards that are in a furlong. And this will give you a fraction of a furlong. Okay, so in this case, we divide we divide the distance. So it's 160 yards divided by 220, which gives us 0.727. So this distance is 7.727. And we round it down to 2 decimal places. This would be 7.73. This is the distance of the race in decimal. So 1 mile, 1 furlong, and 150 yards would be 9.68. 6 furlong, 163 yards would be 6.74. These are all furlongs. 5 furlong and 20 yards would be 5.09. So each distance is in furlongs, not miles and not yards, but decimal numbers. When you're working the going allowance out, it's always best to use the more reliable older aged handicaps, 4-year-olds and over, or 3-year-olds and upwards. So you get all aged handicaps, 3-year-olds and up, but sometimes they're only contested by 3-year-olds. And ideally you want it where a third of the runners are aged 4 or above. But if it's just a 3-year-old race, look at the allowances that 3-year-olds are allowed at the time of year. Ideally, you want to be doing distances 7 furlongs to a mile. But sprints are okay, but a lot of the time sprints are run on different courses. Straight course, Hamilton, half of that's on a different course, over 5 and 6. You've got to be very careful. Sandown's a different course. You've got to be very, very careful with your distances. Some have shoots. So you'll get to know all this the more that you do. Try not to go beyond 10 furlong unless you're having problems ascertaining the going and need extra numbers to figure it out. This is because the longer the distance, the more races become tactical. So there might be a slow pace. Using the Racing Post standard time is a good starting point, but you will discover that there are some anomalies. So I've got, with me, I've got 7 furlongs on the July tracks, a little bit off for me at Newmarket. Hamilton can be a nightmare. Some tracks are very, very difficult to work out. So calculating regularly, you'll become very fast after initially being exceptionally slow and finding it hard. Okay, you'll get a feel for fast run races, fast tracks, different configurations, and what are reliable and unreliable going descriptions given out by the courses. To work this out, you need a basic calculator. It is a must, an absolute must. Don't get any complicated jazzy calculator because you'll come up with weird numbers. You just need a basic calculator. So what we've got to do now, we've got to put it all into practice. So let's work out a going allowance for Sandown on Friday the 14th of June, which happens to be yesterday. Sandown is a difficult track to work the going allowance out because it is actually 2 tracks. So let's have a go. So, putting all this together, we're going to do the going allowance for Sandown on Friday the 14th of June. And Sandown is a difficult track to work the going allowance out. The reason being, let me show you about Sandown. And this is why. At Sandown, over 5 furlongs, they have a sprint track. This is the normal track where they run 7 furlongs, a mile, etc. But they have a separate 5 furlong track straight down the middle. So straight down the middle from right to left, which is usually, but not always, the going can be different. And if you look today, clerk of the course has said that on the sprint course the going is good to firm in places. They've watered it. And on the round course, which is all the other distances, it's good to firm, good in places. So what they're saying is the round course is faster than the sprint course. It's usually the other way around here. But let's crack on. So what we're looking at, we've got a novice stakes. We can't do that one. We've got a maiden. They're terrible for doing the going allowance. We've got a nice handicap there for the sprint distance. We've got a nice handicap there for the round course. Another one and another one. We've got 3 to go at, and if we're desperate we can look at this one. So let's start off with the 7 furlongs. Right, if you look up here, it's a 3-year-old race only, and it's a 0 to 75. Okay, so you go to the charts, which I showed you in the previous presentation. You'll see that for 3-year-olds in June, you add 0.7 tenths of a second on. And that for grade 75, it's 4.7 seconds. So you add those together and you get a number 5.4. You then divide this number by 8, as there are 8 furlongs in a mile. And that will give you 0.675, which you'll multiply by 7. Which will give you a number 4.725. And that is how slow this race should be ran. You then go down here. This is the standard time. Winning time was this. And the standard time is 3.1 seconds faster. So the ground slowed them down by 3.16 seconds. And it should have slowed them down by 4.725. So we've got 4.725 on our calculator. We then take away 3.16, and that gives us a number of 1.565, We then divide this by the distance, and the distance being 7. And that gives us a figure of 0.2235. Put a minus in front of that because it's speeding them up. So you've got 0.2235 for that race. The next race, won by old Johnny Travolta. Let's have a look at this race. Now what you've noticed here, it's actually 1 mile, 1 furlong, 209 yards. We're going to call it 10 furlongs, 1 mile 2. But when it comes to calculating your speed ratings, your handicap ratings, you will have to take this into account. But let's just call this as it is. So what we've got here, we've got a 0 to 80 for 3-year-olds. Now a 0 to 80 is 4.4 seconds allowed per mile. And 3-year-olds at this time of year, 0.7. So that add those numbers together, gives us 5.1. Divide this by 8, which is to convert it into furlongs, and then multiply it by 10, which is today's distance. And that gives you a number of 6.375. Scroll down. The time of the race was 1.8 seconds slower than the standard. And we worked out that it should be 6.375 seconds slow. Take the 1.8 away from 6.375, and that gives us a number of 4.575. We divide this by 10, and that will give us 0.575. The race was quickly ran, and it means the ground may have been speeding the horses up by 0.45 seconds per furlong. But then we look at the next race. And this is a race for older horses, and it's a class higher. That was class 4 for 3-year-olds. This is class 3 for, I believe, older horses, 4-year-olds and up. And it's a nice race to go at. It's a 0 to 90. We know the form is probably borne out. So we've got a 0 to 90. Go to the table, you'll see that a 0 to 90 should be 4 seconds per mile slower than standard. So get the 4, divide it by 8 and multiply it by 10. And that will give you 5. So this race should be ran 5 seconds slower than standard. If you go down, it's 1.37. So take away 1.37 from your 5, and that will give you a number of 3.63, which divided by 10 is 0.363. And that's the number you're looking at, 0.363 seconds per furlong. So now we've got 3 numbers. We've got a 0.2235, a 0.4575 and a 0.363. So the middle of those, if we've only got 3 to look at there, so it's a little bit iffy to go blindly for the middle number. But based on what I'm looking at, what I would do now, if you want to be pernickety, I would go to the 5 furlong sprint form race. Okay, now we've only one race to look at. And it's a 0 to 80. And a 0 to 80. Look at the race. The second was 78. The winner was 77. So we're on safe territory there. So that is 4.4 seconds. Divided by 8, multiplied by 5, equals 2.75. should be 2.75 seconds slow. And it's 1.49. Take away the 1.49, that will give you 1.26. Divide it by 5, and that tells us on the sprint course the going is 0.252 seconds per furlong fast. The problem is we've only got one race to go on. Now what we do know is that the going on the sprint track, according to the clerk of the course, is slower than the round course. So we know that the round course will be faster than 0.25. So we've got two figures which are faster. We've got 0.36 and 0.45, and I would be likely to give this going allowance somewhere in between. Maybe 0.4. So I would write down on my going allowance Sandown round track minus 0.40, and on the sprint course we've only got one to go at, and it's minus 0.25. Now what that shows us, without anything else, is that the 3-year-old race was ran in a good time. Now, one word of caution, and it doesn't tell you on the results. It doesn't tell you anywhere on the results. But if you look at today at Sandown, and they give this every day, today at Sandown, you will see they're on the round course, which is good to firm, good in places. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which is probably all the races. They are ran 22 yards further than the advertised distances. Now that doesn't make too much of a difference when you do the going allowances, but it makes a big difference when you're doing your speed figures. You need to know if the rails have been moved, because 22 yard is 66 feet, and 66 feet is basically 7 lengths. The horses are running about 7 lengths further, and when a horse can win by a nose, it makes a big difference. So there's an example. Sandown's not the greatest. It can be a very difficult track to work the going out. You will get a feel for the going allowance, and you'll be able to do it rather quickly. If you do 2 or 3 races and you're getting roughly the same figure, then that'll be it. Don't carry on any further. And obviously not all courses are like Sandown with a separate sprint track. But you will notice at certain tracks, Windsor, which is a figure of 8 track with a separate straight for sprints, the goings can be all over the place. Newmarket's notorious for the going is very difficult to get at Newmarket, because one race will be run on the far side, one race will run up the centre, and another one they'll run up the near side. They can be very difficult, but you will develop a feel to equate the going allowance. Well, there you go. You've got the going allowance, how to do it. Practice it at each meeting, and you'll come up with certain going allowances. That was for good to firm ground, where you come up with a number where it's faster than the race should be ran. It also happens the other way around, where you'll get a plus number, where the races ran slower than standard. And it's the same method, but more of that when it comes to handicapping horses and giving yourself some speed ratings for certain races. In the next video, we'll be going over how to create your own speed ratings, and that will involve how fast a horse runs. People know these things. This is Dave the Shoot, getting a bit technical. Bye for now.